everyone for joining the Draft.dev webinar series. Used to be monthly. It's looking more like 2 or 3 times a month this year. But we usually cover anything in the realm of DevRel, dev marketing, technical marketing, subject matter wise. Today, we're going to be diving into how to create technical marketing content or dev-oriented content that spreads organically. However, before we get into introing the topic, I'm going to go ahead and intro our panelists here and give each a couple of minutes to get into who they are, what they do, and what they're focused on these days. We're joined by Adam Gordon Bell, longtime friend of Draft.dev. Same with Richard Rodger over here. Adam is, I think, sort of not prioritizing, but focusing on the podcast that you have over there on your side of the house of CoRecursive. And then Richard runs a great agency, Voxgig, that he can provide a little bit more info on. Adam, let's start with you, Jeff, for a quick intro.
Yeah. So I guess me and you, Clayton, go back a little bit. I have a podcast. I was a back-end engineer, started podcasting and doing stuff like this, and then I switched into DevRel because I like creating content. It's super fun. Most importantly, today is my birthday. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know in this webinar. You should have told us no. Yeah, we could have rescheduled that. You're too kind.
No. It's a great way to spend my birthday.
Richard, you mind doing a quick intro on your end, man?
Hey, everybody. So my name is Richard. I'm the CEO of Voxgig. We're a developer relations agency. Years ago, I started a podcast specifically focused on public speaking because I had a whole bunch of trouble myself learning how to do conference talks and that type of stuff. And eventually it became kind of a developer relations podcast, sort of organically. So it's kind of fun. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, just give you a second intro. I love the way of like force yourself to learn a new task by just put yourself out like that's usually a good way to do it. Yeah, so today we're diving into a topic that we'll see what we touch on. Creating developer content that spreads organically is always interesting. All the time we'll get new clients at Draft.dev. For those that aren't familiar, we focus on technical content marketing, building pipelines, driving MQLs here, and they'll come to us and they'll say, yeah, we just want to really, create articles that go viral on Medium. I'm like, okay, great. The minute we'll figure that out will be filthy rich. Like, it's sort of hard. You're just trying to strike lightning a lot of times with stuff spreading organically. So I'll be curious to get each of yours take on like trying to build a structure, because I feel like a lot of times with organic media or content, you got to make sure that you're getting your base hits week in and week out and creating consistent content, and then hoping you find ones that spread organically. But anytime I intro these topics, I always like to start by defining it. So when we talk about developer content that spreads organically, what does that actually mean to each of you guys to start with a definition of our topic? We'll start with you again, Adam. Why not? It's your birthday.
It's my birthday. Yeah, first of all, you should only post on your birthday. I mean, so I would think about content that you hear about even after you post it, right? So some of my best experiences are like I shared something on Reddit, and then it went, it got shared on Hacker News, and then from there, maybe it goes dark a little bit, and then somebody tells me that, it was in their Slack channel at work. Somebody posted, oh, this podcast you did into like a random channel. So that's like the dream, right? That happens every time, but that's what I think of organically, is that it has some sort of big explosion, and then you end up hearing about it through different avenues.
Totally. Similar vein for you, Richard?
Yeah, I guess I'd emphasize the more sustainable side a little bit more. It's nice if you have kind of a group of content creators where the audience or community is kind of excited every time they produce something. So you get a kind of guaranteed audience hit. And then sometimes you get lucky, of course, and it spreads everywhere. But I think the best you can aim for is building authenticity around certain creators.
Totally.
And leveraging that.
Particularly in this space, the audience we speak to highly skeptical, as we've covered ad nauseum in other webinars on this channel. Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. It's everyone wants to get to the point where like organic's driving most of their traffic, right? If we want to sort of zoom out and talk about the consistency more, and it doesn't happen overnight. I feel like consistency is going to be a theme that comes up a lot today, but to continue to define this, like I said, we always like start broad and then we'll narrow down to our specific topics. So when it comes to the technical audience, developers, whichever technical audience you're speaking to, where are they typically going to discover their content? Like whether you're DevRel or you're creating a webinar, podcast, a piece of readable content, what are those distribution channels usually that you guys see the most success in?
For myself, yeah, like it's very content dependent. But I think about Reddit a lot, and a lot of people don't, because people on there can be mean.
Yeah.
Because anonymous people anywhere can be mean, but they can also just be very nice. And Reddit is divided into 1,000 little subreddits, and oftentimes there is one where people are interested in what you're doing if you frame it correctly. So I often think in terms of that, if you're writing something, it should have an audience, and sometimes just these people on an obscure Reddit about Raspberry Pis is the perfect audience because you're writing something about how you guys, used a Raspberry Pi. Yeah.
Totally agree. You're sort of dependent on content types. Yeah. And I have a whole spiel right now. I'm with you. It's the most successful, but you sort of have to have the stomach for it. I guess the thick skin for it is what I would usually say to clients a lot of times with subreddits.
Yeah, it can just be a great way to also understand what is popular, because you can just go to Reddit and switch to top and see well, what's the top thing in the year, right? And if you're trying to convince a certain Reddit that your new product release is, the most exciting thing, but you look at the top things and they're obviously not new product launches, right? They're maybe something a little bit more zoomed out or more interesting. I think it can be a good indicator of what we're talking about here, the type of content that's organic and spreads.
Exactly. We always use Reddit as more of a research tool. We love posting on Reddit. I'm a big Redditor. It's also, like I said, I don't even have social media accounts outside of LinkedIn, but Reddit, I'm all over it. Richard, what do you see are sort of the main channel avenue?
Yeah, man, it used to be so much easier, right? Write a book, promote it on Twitter, job done. and that 15 years ago, that totally worked for me. So, but then it used to be, okay, it's still Twitter X, and that's still where the main dev communities are, and that's where you focus most of your effort. But now Twitter is also fragmented, right? And there's because of noise, because of people leaving, whatever. So now it's been Redditized, I guess. So now you got to have a strategy around, okay, all these smaller communities, Mastodon, right, Blue Sky, all the Reddits, Twitch, whatever. So yeah, it's a grind. I don't think that the silver bullet of Twitter is gone.
Yeah, I feel like you got to know your audience. I feel like we always harp on this, but it comes down to knowing your audience and where they're going to be hanging out the most. And there's evergreen places where you just sort of need to always be cranking out media. Like LinkedIn's always a strong one in our space, and then Reddit, subreddits, you gotta be a part of that community to know how to post effectively on that community. You can't just be a marketing agency coming in and trying to make Reddit work for the first time, because you're gonna get banned. Everyone's gonna hate your content, or you're gonna be too reactionary to the negative comments, stuff like that. It's always a struggle. Maybe to dive into some more granular topics that we can get into here too. Let's talk about what are some misconceptions people usually make about what makes spreading developer content organically successful.
Yeah. Zoom out. I think so. Literally, your product is this little thing, and your whole world is about the product, right? But if you zoom out and look at the larger context, that's the number one thing I think people miss. I was talking to this company, and they build some really cool technology that's on top of Kafka, tackling some of the hardest problems with Kafka, that people reach at a certain type of scale. And they were writing a lot of developer content about what you do, when you've outscaled Kafka, right? So you're not just a Kafka user, right? You can imagine all developers, and then you zoom in and there's Kafka users, and then there's the ones who have outscaled whatever Kafka can do. And And that's who they were talking to, and they were experts in that. But my advice to them was just zoom way back out, right? Like, you want to actually talk to developers in general and be like, why is Kafka a great solution? What are the pros and cons? If you're approaching Kafka, what do you need to know? And like, when I said that to them, they had a light bulb moment, and it's not like they never thought of this, but they had never thought of it. They were just so focused. Their day to day was in this really small world that they operate in. So that's my advice, is just like, zoom out, think of the wider context and how you would apply, your message to, the great swath of unwashed developers out there.
Totally agree. What about you, Richard? What are some of the
Yeah, I mean, Adam kind of hit the nail on the head. One of the misconceptions, I guess, that we see a good bit is people take their how-to guides and try to turn that into organic content. And that's way too focused on the product, right? It's not, like Adam said, right? It's not helping you with the bigger picture. My go-to example is a little bit old these days, and it's not in DevRel, it's actually in marketing. But, Intercom, like the chatbot.
Yeah.
In the early days, one of the founders literally spent 90% of his time writing articles about how to do internet marketing. And it wasn't about chat. It was just like, it was like a university course in doing internet marketing. And he did that for 3 or 4 years. But it built so much authenticity, so much sustainable organic content. But it feels kind of scary, right? Because you're writing about your competitors. You're writing about how to save money by not buying our product.
Yeah. And so, with the audience we speak to, you have to be very honest with them. Like, we often write articles that are very straightforward comparisons of our clients versus the competition. Like, sometimes, the competition is a little better than you about something. Don't try and hide it, because guess what? Your audience is probably smarter than you are. They already know it, or they're going to figure it out. The more forward you are with it, the more faith and trust you're going to build that audience. I agree with you guys. Most of what we see, like the big common misconceptions is like worrying about, you spoke to zooming out, Adam. People get so caught up in the little details of creating content programs. I always compare it to diets. And my team hears me say this all the time. But people are always like, oh, I shouldn't eat legumes, or I shouldn't eat nightshades, or I need to eat more fats or eat carbs. I'm like, is your calorie count even in check? Like, are you eating less than you're spending energy wise? Content is very similar. People are always like, oh, this has to sound like it's written by our CEO. We need to be creating this viral piece on Medium, or we need to be writing about these very specific niche topics. I'm like, man, are you even publishing an article to your audience? Are you even consistently producing your webinar right now? Like, it is all about consistency, whether it's SEO, speaking to your audience, building a community. Consistency is step number one that everyone just likes to blow right past. And they get so caught up in the minutia that they're just publishing something like once a quarter instead of as frequently as they should. I feel like you guys are probably in agreement on that. So
yeah, I feel like that you missed the opportunity to say that Draft.dev is like the Ozempic of content marketing.
Yeah, totally. I try to keep from promoting us too much on here. You guys are welcome to do the same for you. Like I said, just trying to remain educational in our space. But yeah, that's obviously a very important point to us, is driving that consistency. So when it comes to this, hoping for stuff to go viral, I think it's better to I know that's what everyone wants, but it's hard to replicate, and it's sort of like catching lightning in a bottle. So can you think of maybe some specific examples of a piece of content that went viral, and maybe why that's a hard situation to replicate, rather than just telling people, hey, it's difficult, maybe don't chase that every day, and more of like cautionary tale, like sort of hard to replicate these instances that create viral content. Does that make sense? Am I being clear in my question there?
Yeah. Let me think. So, when I was at Earthly, we make a build tool, and the way I was trying to explain this to somebody else was like a Venn diagram, right? So if you imagine, when thinking about content, like a Venn diagram that has 3 circles, right? And the one circle is like the problems that your customer has, right? So you have some customer, and you kind of know who they are in your mind, and they have problems, and not all those problems are like exactly about your product, right? And then you have another circle, which is like the type of content that you can write, like actually the best version of it in the world. For that very specific content, like there's just nothing good out there, right? And then the third Venn diagram is like you can somehow connect it to whatever you're doing, right? Like if it's completely sideways, then it doesn't matter, right? So you do those three things and maybe it will succeed. So we had, because Earthly, you would do a lot of command line programming in your build, and people were using awk, which is like an old Unix tool to like do things, and it's somewhat complex and confusing. Usually if you have a problem with awk, maybe you would just like Google it or now ask ChatGPT or whatever. But I was like, this is a problem that our users have. And so I spent a long time just writing a really in-depth tutorial for how to use awk. And it turns out it's very simple to use if you just understand these concepts. And so I broke it down and wrote just like understanding awk. And then, yeah, I shared it on the programming Reddit. People there love like old school, command line tools. And then from there, it went on Hacker News. And yeah, I mean, I think for quite a while, if you were searching for awk information, you would end up on our website. And we got like, I don't know, probably 60,000 visitors from Hacker News. And it wasn't the most directly related to our product, but it was definitely problems that customers of ours had. And so that's an example, right? And it never converted like if it was about our new product release. We might get 100 people on a new product release and quite a bit convert. This, we get 60,000 people, but a lot of people, it's just them being introduced to who you are. But it's worth it, and it's fun when something like that happens. Just don't bank on it, I guess is...
Yeah. Totally.
Could you post a link to that? Because man, Oak still...
Yeah.
I still get headaches.
I feel like we've got some Java writers around at Draft that we keep around just for those like large enterprise companies that they're still addicted and have to write. But yeah, sort of the same vein.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's so cool.
Yeah. I need to open up the chat. Sorry if I had these permissions closed. Yeah, that makes sense. Richard, what about you? Got some examples?
So I've got two examples. One is the kind of weird and cute, and the other is, it went viral because it was fundamentally high value, right? So the one was fundamentally high value, which is super hard to replicate. But if you have a really good product, it's worth a shot, right? So if you ever saw Ryan Dahl's video conference talk where he introduces Node.js, right, which was given about 15 years ago at this stage. It's like insanely viral content because it's just so fundamentally important what he was introducing. And that's what everybody's going for. But the problem is, I think most people try the weird and cute approach. So the weird and cute is something that about 16, 17 years ago, I was doing the build in public thing where I was building micro apps and solo entrepreneur stuff. And I built this website called startupdeathclock.com, which you put in your revenue and your expenditure and how much funding you got, and it tells you how many months you had to live.
That's awesome.
And I went to the top of Hacker News, of course, right? Startups, all that sort of stuff. So 15 minutes of fame. The spike went like this, lasted about 3 days. Yeah, it was fun, but it was weird and cute, and in the end, just a fun anecdote. So you can't be chasing virality just by saying, "Oh, I'm just going to do whatever to get those hits," because it actually doesn't help you, and it might backfire. So I don't know if you should be chasing virality at all.
Yeah, that's sort of the point I'm forcing on us, but yeah. Yeah, totally.
I mean, there's other more, contemporary examples that I'm not going to mention, rug pull, rug pull stuff. But anyway, yeah, it's just not worth it,
Well, and when stuff does go viral, if you haven't been consistent in your strategy in your production, there's not going to be ways to capture that lightning in the bottle anyways, right? Like if you're chasing fire, you're not going to have the rest of the content there. So maybe let's talk on a more positive note when you do capture that lightning in a bottle. And I didn't add this to our talking points, but I think it's interesting. how do you take advantage of it? How do you make sure it's not just, you just lose all that new attention? What's maybe some infrastructure you can have in place to make sure that you get the best bang for your buck when that traffic starts coming in?
Oh, that's a very good question. Maybe you have a good answer to that, Clayton or Richard. I actually don't.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because the best example of supporting a community and supporting your users that I've seen was a company that's, as soon as you were a user, they set up a private Slack channel for you. And then they had like bots to automate stuff, but you had direct access to the engineers.
Sick.
But that's just not scalable.
Yeah.
It's just not scalable. But I mean, the warm and fuzzy feeling out of that level of support was amazing. And I'm a fan to this day. Yeah, it's hard because if you invest too much in advance, you're sitting there. I mean, I've done the whole thing of starting an open source project and set up everything, the Stack Overflow and all the things, and then crickets. And the problem is, even if it's viral, if people go to an empty community, then they walk away as well. So
Exactly.
yeah, Adam, it's you're right, it's tough.
I find the issues like with viral stuff, good content at least doesn't happen overnight unless you can produce high quality content fast if you're like the expert on the matter. Like you may have some like spelling errors here and there, but we find that like founders, CEOs can produce that kind of stuff pretty quickly. But if you're running a marketing team and you want to continue building on a subject that hit viral, it can be hard to get all the materials in place similar to that topic. So we find that like typically if you already have a good strategy, a content funnel in production anyways, that's sort of related and chasing the similar goal, that one piece that does go viral, there will be other elements there for people to digest. Like I've already said 18,000 times today, is consistency within your goal and your production is what we see drives the most. It's like counter to, because you go viral, we need to try a bunch of different things and we need to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what stick. When I find the opposite is usually true, like having a very firm, well thought out pipeline and goal. And then when that one piece does go viral outside of your like daily hits, it's there's going to be other related material there for them to dive into and continue.
If you like with my 3 Venn diagrams, right? And one of them is like this customer, and the problems they have. If you spend time like talking to these people, like maybe like literally talking to your customers, but also just like talking to people on Reddit. Like I've had a lot of success with that. So it's like maybe it's viral in the small. These people are like, we talk about going viral, but it's actually like there's people out there. So I was on a Python Reddit, like talking about Python problems and then, writing up some solutions to them, like in a blog post, even like quoting people who said like this and that. And you could do that week in and week out. If you have that community, they have problems, you have ways to interact with them. And eventually that can lead to something really big. I have an example of that as well. But yeah, I would say people, the viral, the people are people, is I guess like you can go out there and reach out to them and talk to them. And when you find things that really resonates with individuals, that's more likely that it's going to be something that spreads in the large.
Totally agree. That sort of segues into, I wanted to continue to talk about channels and distribution, but our space can often feel very small. And like you said, it's people interacting with people, despite tech being huge and such a massive employer because of all the individual subjects. Like, so subreddits are a great example of it. You can get really specific and narrow in on a very specific audience. When it comes to channels, I guess let's talk distribution. So we've talked about a lot like actual content creation. I'd say, how do you guys like to handle distribution of content? That's more so we're not talking about paid placements as much as like organic, like syndication, social, communities, Slack, Discords, Reddits. What's the approach you guys like to take when it comes to planning your distribution and getting it out there?
Yeah, I don't have any magic. I will write something and I'll have it scheduled to go out in the AM, like early Eastern Standard Time of a day. And then I will share that with, like, I'll share it on Twitter and on Blue Sky. And then depending on what it is, I might share it on a specific Reddit. And then I will try to interact with people who have questions about it. Like, back to my, like, people are people statement. Like, just, I will just set aside some time to interact with people. And yeah, that is about it. And my secret is not a secret. Like, I've had a lot of things show up on Hacker News, and mainly it's just via doing that. I try to interact with people, and if it catches people's interest, they will share it on Hacker News. Because I get asked a lot, Clayton, actually, for some secret to getting things on Hacker News. And I usually don't submit things there at all. I just try to share it around and try to talk to people that and pray, right? It's like also roll 2 20-sided coins or 20-sided die.
But it's still like you got your Google alerts set up, I'm sure. Like you see where people are mentioning it after you post it. It's one of my, I'm a big hiker and backpacker, and there's this brand called Dursting Gear. And if you ever want to see like great, it's not our industry, but if you ever want to see a founder really implementing good community communication, he clearly has some kind of alert set up. But anytime someone mentions like issues with his tents on Reddit or any other like random obscure forum or a website, any influencers out there, he's always available and commenting on it within 24 hours, which I know is hard to scale, particularly as you become a big company. But honestly, like if you, it's another reason why like hiring DevRel is critical. I'm sure Richard, you got some great opinions on that with what you guys do over there. But you got to have your kernel standards that's out there communicating when it comes to spreading stuff organically.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's okay. So the kernel standards thing is a really good point, because you have a lot of startups where the founder is creating distribution through their personality, right?
Yeah.
So you look at my favorite example, because he's an ex-colleague of mine, Matteo Collina, who is one of the founders of Platformatic HQ. He's on Twitter. He's blogging. He participates in technical steering committees, the whole thing. But once you're a scale up, right? How do you take that lightning in a bottle, right? How do you do that? So what we tend to recommend, and most clients don't follow this because this is kind of lead time, is you've got to create space in your technical organization for people who are good at communicating, to have time to get out there and do stuff. So maybe they want to like build their own programming language, which is completely orthogonal to what the organization wants to do. You know what? Kind of let them. But this is not like the old Google 20% time, because there's a quid pro quo, right? This is, okay, cool. And you're probably going to do most of it at the weekend because it is your thing. But you gotta be telling people about it. So that creates a lot of micro distributions. So you access the trusted audiences of that set of internal engineers that have built a little bit of a following. It's super authentic stuff, right? Unfortunately, doesn't guarantee anything about Hacker News.
Yeah.
And wow, I mean, so the interesting thing is, okay, the marketing team goes to the CTO and says, yeah, we want to steal engineer time.
Yeah.
So I have seen very few people implement that effectively. But we're just copying the founder distribution model, which is so effective.
Totally.
I've had luck with just, there's, as you said, it can be great if people on the engineering team are creating content, but yeah, sometimes they're just not going to. But interviewing works great. So I will interview somebody who works on the engineering team. I did it at Pulumi recently. They have a very cool AI product, but they're also very busy because AI is moving very quickly. And so, me and the AI team wrote an article, and I mean, it's a very loose we, right? Like it's all their content, but I'm the one who put it into a blog post, right? So I'm almost in an editor role or a journalist, just interviewing them. And that can have a very small time commitment from their perspective.
Totally. Build a structure. We do that all the time. It's like there's some content that just needs to be written by a founder or an internal SME. It's like, let us build the outline, let us edit it for you, tech review it. We just used to this, put your thoughts on paper, interview it, and we'll transcribe it, stuff like that. Totally agreed. Another like,
so I mean, this is sorry, Jake,
go
but I mean,
ahead.
there's another dirty little secret, right? So Adam will know this, being a podcast host as well. If you have a little bit of help or team or whatever that can kind of do the logistics of publishing, all that sort of stuff, podcast content is super cheap to create, right? So as Adam was saying, right, just pick internal engineers and interview them on a podcast, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so simple and really effective, totally authentic, costs you basically nothing. It's like, okay. And
the other thing with those podcasts too is like it's a really easy way for you to talk to leaders at your prospective clients or like prospects.
oh, totally. Yeah.
Easy touch point, right? Like people are like, well, trying to start a podcast. It's going to take 2 years to build our audience. I'm like, yeah, but in those 2 years, you're going to be talking to all the people you want to sell your product to. Like it's an easy.
It doesn't scale, but it is fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. An untapped well, I think on this front, I think a lot of people overlook too when it comes to organic distribution is, and I believe this works just as well for open source products as well as enterprise, is identifying your strong community members that are already talking about you on the internet and build a relationship with those individuals. So whether you're enterprise focused, you're like, there's that one client that always has that pro that is in your customer service inbox every single day, like build a relationship with that person. Or if it's the community users, they're already cranking out YouTube videos on how to use your product, engage with that individual. More often than not, they will want to help you spread and produce content for you. They're already talking about you for free. Like, why not make that connection and not have control, but have a relationship with them and, use it to your advantage. I think it's something people I don't know, just forget about. I bring it up all the time. It just seems obvious to me. People are like, oh, I didn't really think about doing that. Like, okay.
Yeah.
So
that's a great idea. Go ahead.
There's a little follow on to that, which I used in my previous company actually, which was a consulting company, which is when you can identify people like that. If you're at the size where you're running your own conference, ask them to speak. They will love you forever. We never got to the point where we put in place logistics around this, but we were thinking of sponsoring people like that to speak at whatever conference. You got to balance that with internal people. They want to speak at conferences as well. But a little bit of love goes a long way.
Agreed. All right, our Q&A is stacking up, but there's one point I want to talk to before we dive into Q&A in the last 15 minutes or so, which is balancing, and this is sort of like tools in the tool belt, which one you want to focus on. Balancing what you can learn and what you try and drive through SEO versus more so the community side of things, which aren't necessarily data driven, but you understanding your audience and where they're at. How do you balance the efforts when it comes to, I guess, strategy of your content when it comes to SEO versus community engagement? Let me know if I'm not being clear there.
I get it. I think like if you want to do things that spread through community, it's going to take some effort. It's not going to work at first. Like you need to find this authentic voice for yourself that resonates. If it does, like you're going to see a lot of value even in helping like search. So at Earthly, and less so with my podcast, but definitely at Earthly, we had a lot of stuff that we did that did very well in Reddit and Hacker News. And that just led to a lot of people to link to us. And that just meant that when we wrote very specific, keyword focused content, it did very well. And also we just had a certain amount of these people get what they're talking about because they had read, this more authentic, viral, if we're using that word, content. So, I mean, I think you need both and you need to combine them. One is like meat and potatoes and one's like dessert, I guess.
What's your take there, Richard?
I mean, I agree with Adam. It's so one thing that we don't do is SEO.
Yeah.
So it's actually just a different world. Now I don't disagree that it's important and there's ways and means, but it's kind of heartbreaking to keep up with it. So what we know is the organic stuff. But if you're going to use SEO, get an expert.
Well, I would even say like we have to pay attention to this a lot at Draft, and everyone still has the old school thought of SEO, which is like all those like micro goals, like word densities, phrase densities, targeting certain topics. And Google and its sort of battle with AI right now is reworking all of its SEO functionality, really focused on driving content that informs the reader, which goes back to building content that's good for your community. So it's really, if you focus on creating good, engaging content for your community, you're going to end up winning the SEO battle anyways. And it's all, we have to have that conversation a lot. And a lot of people, because, you know, where we've been in the marketing space for the last couple of decades, it's a hard relationship for them to rework, but that's really where it's going moving forward with Google on a lot of that.
I totally agree with that. Like if you think of like, when I was saying the 3 Venn diagrams, like one of them was like, what's the thing that you can create like the absolute best version of the web on it? Well, like, if Google were all knowing, that is where they would send people for that question, right? So you're just like betting if you make the best content that like Google will figure that out.
Totally. All right, let's talk some Q&A. This one right off the bat's a doozy. I don't have an answer for you. Okay, this one's easy. So when it comes to Reddit, so would you answer people's questions on Reddit or make a Reddit post yourself? I'd say it's a little bit of column A, column B. You just have to just make sure you have someone on your staff that's very familiar with Reddit and the communities there if you're going to get engaged with it. Adam, you probably have some opinions on.
Yeah, so it's important who's asking the question. Like if you are a marketing professional and don't understand well the persona of the person that you're talking to in that Reddit, like I would find somebody who you can tap, like Richard's idea of engineers within the organization, who can speak authentically to that audience. And then like they'll know if they're familiar with the people in the Reddit and the things they're talking about. I think they will have a sense of what is appropriate for that community. Each little Reddit or community online has its own norms, so it's a bit hard to give blanket advice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Super easy to get burnt as well, right? So you just the wrong side of pitch, and you know.
Well,
the mod puts you out.
You know, like everyone's already trying to prove how smart they are, particularly in the small communities. Like whether I'm on like the baking subreddit or the hiking subreddit or like whatever hobby I'm into, everyone's trying to prove they know more than the other person usually on Reddit. So like you're gonna post stuff. Yeah.
I know the question was about Reddit, but an adjacent area are Slack communities. And they usually provide you with very clear rules about what you can and cannot do. But they're usually kind of safer, easier spaces because people are often asking specific questions if you've chosen well. And you can provide a lot of general help to people and build up a lot of effective goodwill, effective karma. So they're quite, I mean, I don't know. We would say put as much effort into those.
Where do you find these as well, Richard? That'd be my question.
Yeah, with difficulty, right? Because there are some absolute gems out there, and yet they don't promote themselves. They're kind of organic. Yeah. There are, there are also businesses that run them. The Slack channel is kind of is the main aspect of their business, but they're not that hard to find, right? So a Slack community for X, right, whatever it is gonna start throwing stuff up. I mean, even go to Reddit and ask Reddit.
Yeah,
stuff, right?
Our CEOs are with this Carl, he's always in these random Slack groups, and all the time as the sales guy, I'll be like, "Hey, how'd you find out about us?" Like, "Oh, we saw Carl posted on so and so Slack group that I've never heard of." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's gonna be fun for me to try and replicate." All right, yeah, but yeah, it's just knowing the community. I feel like you're finding those Slack groups. So the next question I feel like is hard. Was there any do you use any tools for this community engagement? This question says Reddit specifically. It's hard. I'm not aware of a lot of like marketing tools focused on Reddit. However, I will drop this one thing in the chat that is like an AI search engine for Reddit that I find really effective. Because Reddit search is renowned for being crappy. So this is a good way of digging into and finding specific topics in Reddit. Adam, you'll probably love that. It's something I've
That's
been
awesome.
playing with recently. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah.
I feel like, I mean, in my work now, I work with a lot of very smart marketing professionals who have a lot of analytics and reports on things, and I'm kind of lost. And like, I just come from this background of like, I was a developer and then I started doing this kind of marketing stuff. And so I just like, I don't have any tools. I just, go out and talk to people on Reddit or wherever. I think that is like a guiding principle for me. Like when we talk about what should you say, when should you say it, where should you go? Like if you feel that you understand the community and you're just like a human, then
Yeah.
I think that doesn't help you scale, to be honest. Like I don't know how you replicate that besides me, but that's how I
Well,
think.
at that point, you're hiring marketing professionals, like you said, and that's their job and that's what they do, and they know how to make it more analytical. But at that point, you're hiring professionals to do that. When it comes to, like I said, a lot of people are still at the stage where they need to zoom out and just focus on consistent communication rather than some of those finer details. Yeah. Richard, you got any Reddit tools over there?
Yeah, I don't. So I think you can think about a whole bunch of tools for Twitter or LinkedIn that are effective, even ones that go way back, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing like that for Reddit, really, because it's just not that sort of place.
Exactly.
Like there's no point going viral on Reddit in many ways, because you actually just want people in your specific communities to notice.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't think there's any way to avoid the Reddit grind, really.
It just is. You either know the community or you don't. It's just it is what it is.
Like it's not. Yeah, it's not like X or whatever, where dev tooling will definitely help. Reddit it just doesn't work that way.
I feel like Reddit goes back to what Adam was saying too. It's like being an engaging user on there that happens to be associated with your organization rather than pushing your organization. Like I joke the way our CEO would hire talent is he would go to people like this is how he got me. He was like, "Hey, Clayton, I know you're a sales guy. I'm trying to figure out how to hire a sales guy. Can you teach me how to hire a sales guy?" And then, like, slowly through that conversation, Carl's like, "Are you sure you just don't want to work here?" It's like, if you engage in the writing communities from an honest perspective of asking questions, like, what do you guys think about this? How do you approach this?
Yeah.
How do you engage with that? And your name is already tied to the brand that you're working for. Eventually, they'll look into you. Like, Reddit wants to know who they're engaging with. And it's a way to sort of drive some soft ROI there, too.
Yeah, asking questions. I love that. What's
Yeah.
like, okay, so you guys said there's tools for LinkedIn and X. Like, what are those? Like, what do we do? Tell me the secrets.
It's more from a sales perspective. There's a lot of sales guy tools out there.
Some of them are a wee bit nosy as well.
What's great thing going on? But yeah.
Yeah, I mean the Twitter ones are more just about managing content calendar, that type of stuff. The LinkedIn, in a previous life, I've paid people to build like custom outreach tools on LinkedIn, because it's LinkedIn is always, they don't really want you to do that sort of stuff with sort of mixed effectiveness. But I mean, if you're on those platforms, you can see stuff coming in that's definitely automated. Again, it's not that hard to find, but I mean, it's the era of AI slop, right? The amount of emails cold emails I get advertising cold emailed outreach. It's gone like this, right? It's kind of crazy. Just going back to Reddit. So one thing that does happen is if people in a subreddit realize that the content is actually a sort of a pitch, or the pitch is kind of at the end, or it's AI generated or automated in some way. Wow, I mean, they just dogpile.
Real quick,
you're burnt, right? You're just burnt. And I mean, there is this. I think it's like startups, maybe, or entrepreneur somewhere, where for a while people had to post like in capitals, "I will not promote," because there was so much of this AI stuff coming. So then they had to ban people saying, "I will not promote."
Yeah, it's out. Yep, checks out. Sounds like Reddit.
It's hard to game. I think the answer is kind of. You just can't game it.
Yeah, I come from an honest perspective. That's not the way Reddit works. This is what it is. Great resource, but yeah. All right, we talked a lot about Reddit. Let's hop on something different here. I think so. This person says, do you find that going to conferences increases your social reach? I feel like that's finally. It took us a few years, but events and conferences are really starting to spin back up when it comes to engaging with your community.
Oh yeah, absolutely right. They don't call it the whole way track for nothing.
Yeah.
So it's weird because we have this collective kind of amnesia about it because of COVID, and the best conferences are the micro ones, like 200, 300 people. That's where you can really connect with people. And hopefully they'll come back, right? So many of them died.
Yeah, we do like the smaller ones that are just like subject specific rather than like brand specific. Like we've always really enjoyed going to KubeCon. That's always a lot of fun. But yeah, the more I feel like the smaller the conferences aren't as far as audience and subject, the more engaging are. Sort of like subreddits. It's like a live subreddit.
So I mean, the thing is like, and there's the same issue, right? Where you have, it's important that it's conferences, not trade shows, right? So God damn it, I'm Irish, but I'm not going to recommend the Web Summit because that's a trade show. It's kind of cool to experience. Here's a hack for the Web Summit. Find the nearest hotel, the nearest expensive hotel, and hang out in the lobby.
Yeah, you'll be good to go. Yep. I even as a sales guy, I'd do that. Like I was just wandering around AWS last year, just talking to folks. Like, you don't
need to actually go, find those mini conferences, sponsor those mini conferences, send speakers. That is huge payback. The problem is, how do you measure that, right? That old DevRel issue, because that community, you're looking at sort of 18 months plus before that actually generates anything revenue. It's tough. It's always a leap of faith.
There are ways to get around it a little bit, like any of the materials you're using to engage or any links you're sharing drive to a specific landing page for that event. So you at least have some idea to preach to leadership about. But yeah, it's always, DevRel is always going to be about long-term healthy relationships, which I think is the better way of going about marketing anyways in sales. But yeah, it's hard to measure, particularly the events. Okay, this next person here. All right, we already answered that one. Okay, would love to hear more distribution ideas. Sometimes the problem is no one is ever reading your excellent blog post to then share it on Reddit, Hacker News, etc. I feel like we didn't talk about syndication a ton. That's definitely like a good thing. If you can figure it out. Like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's free. So you might as well put it up there if you can't. Like anywhere that offers free posting with a relevant community to you, I think is great. I also think newsletters are highly underrated. Like very specific newsletters still get pretty good engagement in our space. But curious to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, the newsletter thing is a good idea. We used to run a newsletter. It's hard work. Content every week. It's such a pain, right? If you're playing the content, like you'd be like 2 hours.
I tell clients all the time, like all these newsletters will have paid promo. Like, hey, book then we'll place your article for this amount of money. But half the time, if you just reach out and be like, hey, do you need content for your next newsletter? They'll be like, yes, please share an article and you can get in with that audience for free. It's usually a very engaging audience. You lined me up on that one, Richard. That was great.
Yeah. Easy to say, of course.
Totally.
That needs to go into your content calendar, you see. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything for you, Adam? We sort of covered our usuals that are here. It sort of just comes onto your audience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So there's so many things that I don't know. Like,
yeah,
I don't know syndication. I'm not an expert on conferences. I think like my specialty or whatever has always just been creating the content that's really, really good. And that can paper over a lot of problems. Like if you there's a guy who you should have on this Draft.dev, Michael Lynch. He built a business up around sharing on Reddit and Hacker News because he had this hardware product, and then he built a course about like how to get to the top of Hacker News. And so I took his course, and then eventually he interviewed me for his course. But like his big lesson was to do a really good job. Like, he was like, a blog post, I put 40 hours into it. Like, I have original artwork, I research all the things, I interview people, and like it is apparent that he puts that much work into things, right?
Totally.
And there's no big secret. Like, I mean, yeah, he picks a topic that's relevant to the communities he's talking about, but he also is just like, I'm hitting a high bar, right? And so I think there's so much value in that, right? If you want to get in a newsletter, I mean, your tip is amazing, just ask them. But the other thing is that if your content's really good, it'll end up in newsletters you haven't heard of. But you gotta be willing to actually do that. Like who's putting 40 hours into a high value, piece of content.
Totally agree. As long as you can continue to publish. If you're doing one, I would say my one pushback there is if you're publishing once every 6 months because it takes you like 30 hours, right? You're probably not going to see the return on it. But yeah, totally agree. Those are those like we're always pushing to. It's like have your founder or CEO so crank out that like medium worthy piece once a quarter. Yeah, totally. All right, answered that one. We got loaded with questions today, so we'll try and grab a couple more in the last 7 minutes here, and then I'll go ahead and say a quick goodbye so we can dive into these questions a little bit more. But thank you everyone for joining this webinar as usual. We do them at least monthly. I'll drop the link. We'll follow up with everyone the recording that joined today. But our last couple of questions here: how do you decide what to write about? How do you know if it's valuable to the community? I think we actually have a webinar about this. I don't have the link right in front of me, but if you want to watch 60 minutes on this topic, I highly recommend it. But when it comes to deciding what to write about, that's really going to come. So this the answer we always give, which is knowing your audience. Like you've got to know your audience and where it intersects with what your brand's strong, powerful at. I assume Adam and Richard's answers are probably similar on that front.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Do you recommend posting content from a person or from a company channel? This is actually interesting. I'm curious to hear y'all's perspectives on this.
I'd say person, like be a human. That's me. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Totally. We do have clients that have like a brand name for developers pages. That can be good for like releases and, announcements and stuff like that too. But if you can find internal SMEs that act as always say your kernel standards, I think that's really effective.
Yeah.
I love kernel standards.
Yeah. I'm taking that.
Roll with it.
That's a good one.
All right. The last one here to wrap up the day. I work as the marketing and technical writer for a small startup. So far, we have a few blog posts up. Do you have any big picture suggestions for how we should build and promote our content for long-term engagement? Fairly familiar with Reddit. I would say I've already said it, but we focus on consistency. Like if you can handle that as a small organization, you've won 85% of the battle. Like have a goal, have a strategy, and consistently drive towards both of those is you're sort of winning the race compared to 90% of your competition out there if you do those two things. Anything to add there, either of you guys?
I mean, I would say, I don't know if this disagrees with your It's not a disagreement, but yeah, I would say raise the bar, right? So if you work in some sort of industry, what are the top pieces of content in that industry that people have put out, right? Like maybe somebody put out some great giant posts that covered this whole minor area. Understand what those great pieces of content that resonate and are like part of the canon of that space. Like I know that awk article I mentioned will be part of the canon of awk tutorials. Find those and then try to write something like of that caliber. Try to write something that will be remembered.
I think that agrees to me. That's a first strategy. Is like rather than just throwing topics at the wall. It's like let's figure out who's at the top in our space. And try and write something better.
Yeah.
I've got to read between the lines here, and I'd say those blog posts have gone up randomly based on when people had time to write them, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So to the attendee, lead into actually executing a content calendar and make that, the CEO fires your ass if you don't actually follow it.
Yeah.
It's just, okay, it's a startup process, blah, blah, blah. But running a content calendar is a little bit of discipline that just compounds.
Could not agree more. I find like small companies will run into an issue where like founders will often try and micromanage that content calendar too. And you got to stress the importance of like, not everything's going to sound like you wrote it. We got to get it out there. We got to speak to the community. You still want to write high quality content and still give that founder the opportunity to write content that they produce themselves. That goes back to strategy, consistent execution. Content calendar is critical. Do not just write content for the sake of it. If you take anything away from any Draft.dev webinar, is like don't just like plaster content out there because you think it sounds cool this week and then move on to the next. Have an idea of where you want to go. All right, guys, thank you for joining today. Richard, Adam, really appreciate y'all. Everyone else, check out their orgs and podcasts. Great resources. If you ever need help with technical content writing, come see us here at Draft. Otherwise, join us for the next webinar, everyone. Thank you. Have a good one today.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
See ya.